Okay, well, I'm Ken Ralston, president of Sony Pictures Imageworks. So I'm president of this visual effects facility here at Sony, and I've been supervising a lot of shows here and also developing to direct Jumanji 2, coincidentally. And when Jumanji 1 was going on, I was a supervisor of visual effects at Industrial Light and Magic. It really is someone who, from the get-go, from my experience, it's where you get working with the director very early on in the screenwriting phase, generally, to talk about the kinds of shots that are in the movie, how they can be done. I mean, just talking on a technical side, but also creatively on an artistic, aesthetic side. You're also involved in the design of the shots, depending on what kind of supervisor you are, and also involved with how to create the different set pieces, what kind of shots would make a better sequence, what gets the best dramatic effect out of what you're doing, how to save a few pennies if possible, despite how complicated a lot of the work always is. And you're just kind of day-to-day involved with every aspect of it. You also work with a lot of the other departments on a show. I mean, a lot of times I'm working with costumes, set building, and set design. Obviously, the mechanical effects, everyone works as close together as they possibly can. But when you're right before you really start shooting, when you're getting all the great ideas out, that's a blast.
My name's Tom Woodruff Jr. from Amalgamated Dynamics, and along with Alec, I was one of the co-creators of the animatronic animal characters.
My name is Alec Gillis. I am Tom Woodruff Jr.'s partner in Amalgamated Dynamics. We created the animatronic and makeup effects for the film Jumanji.
Well, Alec and I really got together during our tenure with Stan Winston, and that was back when we were working on shows like the first Terminator and Aliens and Predator, and it was really a great time, a real formative time at Stan Winston's.
We left Stan Winston Studios in 1988 and formed Amalgamated Dynamics Incorporated. Our first feature was for Galen Hurd. It was called Tremors, and we did the giant sandworms for that film. We moved on to David Fincher's Alien 3, Death Becomes Her for Bob Zemeckis, and throughout the years we've done other effects, special makeup for the Santa Claus with Tim Allen. More recently we did Starship Troopers. We have been nominated for Alien 3, Death Becomes Her, and Starship Troopers, Oscar nominated.
Yeah, when we first got the call for Jumanji, we were contacted by Larry Franco, who was sort of searching out people to do handle the creation of the animatronics and some of the makeup effects. And when we learned that Joe Johnston was involved, we were very excited because we were big fans of really of his work from The Rocketeer.
Also, you can't help but be a fan of Joe Johnston if you're a fan of special effects movies because of his background with the Star Wars films. I know that we were big fans of all those films, and looking through the art of books, that signature Johnston, you knew you were going to be seeing something cool.
Well, I met Joe on Star Wars, and he was involved with a lot of the design of the show, storyboarding the movie, and he's had his hand into a lot of different things on the show, and I was doing camera work on it. And really, I knew Joe all the time that ILM was going on, so basically working with him on different shows, and we all had our jobs, and then a lot of times apart. And then he managed to break away and start directing, and then I wound up working with him on Rocketeer and Jumanji.
We read the script and got together with Joe, and we were very happy to hear him say that he wanted the animals to look somewhat stylized, as if they had come from a child's imagination, because we were really up for doing something that had some style and not merely replicating animals. Otherwise, why not use real animals? Yet at the same time, we wanted it to be a subtle stylization so that you wouldn't look at the film and feel like you're watching artificial puppets, creation.
Well, most of these animals have kind of an unpleasant attitude. They're all trying to stomp on you.
Our belief is that for the effects to appear seamless, it's always better if you start with something practical that has been photographed on film. It's a great reference for the CGI artists to shoot for, and it gives you better interaction with light and the actors as well. Those tend to be the more successful combinations. And naturally, the animatronics tend to take the lead because we have to have our stuff built and ready for production, whereas most of the CGI work happens in post-production. And Jumanji is a good example of an excellent blend of animatronic and CGI.
If you can build an object that you can get a lot of mileage out of in a film, because you're only building one of them, let's say, but you're getting 25 or 30 shots, you've just saved a lot of money. And that's really the bottom line reason anyone does it that way. Otherwise, they'd probably just do it all CG. And there are moments, too, where there are certain types of interaction, how it is involved with the actors, that it pays to have a mechanical creature there, or a mechanical, physical, anything in front of an actor.
I believe that the decision as to what animals we would be responsible for and what animals ILM would be responsible for came from the meetings where we sat down with Mark Miller and Steve Price and Joe and started talking about what were the ideal techniques for any given animal. And what came out of those conversations, for instance, were that ILM didn't feel that they wanted to take on the crocodiles because of the interaction with water and Robin Williams, and that we would be doing animatronic versions of many of the animals that required sort of a more intimacy, whereas the Stampede, where there isn't a lot of contact with actors, we would not be doing any animatronic versions of that.
My name is Jim Mitchell, and I worked on Jumanji in the capacity of a supervisor, sequence supervisor, and also got to model some of the characters, the mosquitoes, the bats, and was able to animate some of the characters as well. Like all the shows we work on, we work real closely with the creature effects and practical effects teams, and a lot of times after the fact of shooting the creatures and the practical work, we're always getting those pieces back here to refer to in the process of modeling and making sure we're painting the texture so that we're matching basically what they've done. So, typically they've established, because it's such a hands-on with the practical and creature stuff, and the director can mold it from the beginning there, and we usually take our cues very much like we do with Jurassic, with Stan's dinosaurs and maquettes. We start working our stuff to look just like that. So similar in this sense with this. Obviously, there's a few characters like the mosquitoes that were all CG. So Doug Chang, our art director, was instrumental in providing photos and reference of bugs and just what they want, what Joe wanted for that, but most everything else, there was a practical creature to match to.
The relationship you want to have with a mechanical effects group is hopefully, which this rarely happens, you actually start planning and building, creating things all at the same time, so you're all doing the same work. And normally with the crazy schedules that you get, and this film was one of them, you try to communicate as much as you can with each other, so we're not doing two different things, but still, you look at this movie and the lion that we made is not the lion they made. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the main one is there was no lion for us to build when we had to build it. So we were getting into the structure of the head, the body, and all these different things. We knew vaguely what the hair work was going to be, but not exactly. And then there's other things that happen on the mechanical side, which is just, it happens on every show, which is they gave us actual basic forms and sculptures of the head that they were going to use, so we could put that into the computer. But once they started putting the mechanical devices inside and the hair work, it altered everything completely. So, and I really didn't want to go back to where their line was totally, because I wasn't that, I wanted to make it a little more realistic than what they were going for, just slightly, because we were seeing our whole creature walking around, and I wanted to sort of feel like the same lion, but not quite the same lion. Plus, for ILM, the lion meant a lot of really a lot of R&D on hair work. I mean, that lion was actually probably the first creature to use such extensive, complicated hair work in a film. I'm sure it is. It certainly took long enough, so it had to be.
My name's Carl Frederick, and I was one of the CG supervisors on the film. And we had some particular problems on this movie that we needed solved, and I was asked to do hair for the movie as one of my big contributions. And we had some problems that we never tackled before. The most difficult one, I guess, was the lion's hair, the lion's mane. We had some previous work that was done using software to make hair, but we hadn't done anything of that kind of magnitude, that kind of long flowing hair, big puffball around his head. So this was our big challenge, and scared the hell out of everybody.
The challenge is because of, it's what computers don't do well, which is a sense of serendipity or accident or chaos. And so if you're doing what's supposed to look like a lot of hair work on something and have it look naturalistic and not like some kind of a plastic, slapped on, object, it takes computer power and expertise in creating the software, proprietary, and taking stuff off the shelf and mixing and matching all this stuff, and essentially trying to figure out how to give that sense of, a lion's mane, what does that look like? Well, you start to analyze it, and it's not just this solid mass of hair. I mean, it's all this individual hairs that give it a sense of eccentricity and believability, it gives it an organic look. You have to build that in, and that takes a long time. And for this film, this really was a groundbreaking picture in that respect. It was shot at a place called Bridge Studios, which originally was a facility built to build the Golden Gate Bridge. And so there's these huge, long metal buildings that they've turned into sound stages, which don't really work very well for sound stages, but must have been great for building a bridge. And all the sets, all the interior sets were built, I think all of them were built in that studio. I mean, also, the thing that we're not even talking about were those silly rhymes in the window on each one of these rolls. You can't believe how complicated that became. Trying to create the look and just trying to get the timing exactly right, because not all of them form so you can read them, because the characters are reading them out loud. So sometimes you want the audience to finish reading it, other times you want it just to form enough, and then you cut, and then our characters finish off the dialogue, and each one was a little problem unto itself. I think the end piece where it says Jumanji, we may have taken the title piece that was done by someone other than ILM, I don't remember who, and stuck it in there just to save time. The boy at this point, if I remember correctly, they had done, I believe, a 3D cyber scan of him, if I'm not mistaken. And we basically took that form, and then we took elements of the boy and basically pasted them onto that thing, which is a 3D object, and gave you the illusion that he was in 3D. We created the yell, and then basically using technology that was being developed, sorry Stephen, for Twister, I was using the guys who were on that, and I basically screwed around with it to create the vortex effect for him getting sucked into the game.
It's fun. I mean, this is one of the first big effects sequences in the movie after, I guess Alan's the character, gets sucked into the game board, was the bats that swarm out of the fireplace and around the female lead character. Like I say, it was great. I got to model this bat, and we created a generic cycle of the wings flapping. Pete Dalton, one of the senior animators around here, then took that and created these hundreds of paths of the bats flying in this three-dimensional space. We'd actually, recreated the room so that he knows that the bat shouldn't be knocking into the wall and where the doorway is that they have to exit and stuff like that. And so it's just offsetting those different bat cycles so that they've got their own individual characters and so that they're interacting with the female lead here. It was again another tricky thing, just doing these many characters in one shot. I think one of the main shots. There's about 100 bats in the thing, and that's again, it's a lot of choreography of bats not bumping into each other. We didn't use a lot of these. I mean, bats have been done in films before, Batman and all that, but we never got into this whole process of what they call flocking software. Because I mean, it's a great technique. It allows you to do stuff, but usually it works to more. But at least back then, the sophistication of it worked great for stuff way in the background where you couldn't see the details. But it was critical because to us that we knew that the hero bats were interacting with the character. You'll see them come up and approach her and then fly back and all that kind of stuff. And Pete did a great job on that. I think Robert Weaver was one of the TDs who, tremendous work on lighting that many characters in this broad expanse of the room,
The bat was one of the first creature puppets we had completed, and again, based on some drawings we had done, we created a full-size puppet that was capable of sort of a limited facial movement, because it was only ever going to be seen in one scene where it was attached to Sarah's shoulder as a little girl as she's fleeing the room, and it had to be able to look at her, and Joe wanted it to have this wicked smile. So we had the bat had a head slightly larger than the size of a golf ball, and we had to work in the technique of being able to have its eyes blink and have it smile and give it some animation, and then the whole thing was covered with hair. And once we had that bat completed, we sent the actual puppet up to ILM, and then that was used to generate all of the multiple bats that are seen flying around the kids in the scene.
That shot where the little bat is attached to her and smiles is technically the only shot that our animatronic bat is in, and then the rest of the flying bats were the ones that ILM based on our bat design.
Oh, actually, our bat puppet is used again here in the attic. Again, this was the same bat, had been built for an entirely different purpose, and Joe came to us and said, it'd be great when Peter's discovering the attic, I want to see the bat, sort of reminiscent of what had happened 30 years prior. So we were able to rig the bat hanging from a rafter overhead, and opened up the wings using little tiny rods, external rods to manipulate them.
I'm Doug Smythe. I was the sequence supervisor for the monkey shots for Jumanji. We had about 25, 30 something other shots of monkeys featuring digital hair, which is the first time that we had ever tried to do that, and that was the biggest problem that we had to solve to get this movie going. Technically speaking, the monkeys were quite a challenge because of the hair. This is the first time that ILM had ever attempted to do hair rendering, and both the monkeys and the lion are using this new technology. The reason that rendering hair is so complicated is because there's just so gosh darn many of them.
Yeah, tackling fur and hair in general is a real hard thing in the computer graphics world. At least when we were starting on this at the time, it's a very render intensive, meaning it takes a long time to just create one frame. Let the computer, take the night and churn out just one frame. Back then, anywhere between 4 and 6 hours a frame just for it to render.
Well, hair, first of all, is very different than the kinds of things that we normally do. We normally will do surfaces, and surfaces are easy to define more or less. I mean, modelers do some amazing things. They build these surfaces, but hair is something that you can't get a really good hold of it in a model. So right off the bat, you can't model it exactly. There's just too many elements, separate elements. And then because there are so many separate elements, it's difficult to animate. It's a problem right from the beginning, and it goes through the entire process. Every part of the process that we deal with is crippled by this, millions of hairs that are hard to model, hard to animate, hard to render. So we had to build a whole new system to do it. And to make the hair for the lion, what we decided to do was to make, instead of trying to make every hair, which you can't do, but in order to make the hair for the mane, which has a very particular shape, we modeled individual hairs on the head of the lion at critical places so that we could get it to have the right shape at a given spot. So we would do that at, say, 40 spots over the head. And then using our program, we would interpolate the rest of the hairs. We would actually fill in the whole head with hairs such that they matched what the hairs looked like that we modeled, the 40 hairs that we modeled, when those hairs that were filled in would be nearby. So that was used both for modeling and animation purposes. When the thing is animated, what we did was, instead of animating every hair individually, we would animate the 40, what we call control hairs. And then the animation for the rest of the hair would be derived from them. And we did make a system that we could get our programmer, who did the lion's share of the work, to change it for us whenever we wanted something different. So let's say I wanted to be able to make hairs into twisty little things, and that wasn't part of the original system. He would just add the twisty little things button to it. See? So that what we did was we made one which you could write your own little program to make the hair look the way you wanted. You could write a little hairstyling program. And the main program that drives the whole thing would just suck that up and then spit out the hairs to just the way you want it. So that was a big advance in the way we did things. And in the meantime, since Jumanji, we have not only done that, but we've rewritten the whole thing basically from scratch, because we created, how in software things just are always advancing. So we created a whole new system for making particles and smoke and the whole 9 yards. And hair was kind of a natural part of that sort of object stuff. So that was part of the new system, and that's kind of where we are now.
I don't know how long we worked on. I think it must have been about a year, and that's typical for a big movie. I take that back. We on this movie had much more pre-production than we normally do, but it was very much needed on this movie, because it was just like we had done in Jurassic. We had decided we could build creatures and characters, but now we have to make the next step by putting fur and hair and feathers and things like that onto these creatures. So part of it was, I think there was some involvement with trying to get Robin Williams, so they postponed it, and it worked to our benefit that we got much more of the pre-production time to research and develop how we were going to do fur and hair and build this whole machine and software around making it usable. It's one thing to do this stuff. I mean, there's, all this stuff is always, that you see ILM using, has always been out there. You'll go down to SIGGRAPH, and it could have even been done 2 years ago, but it's somebody who's been spending years and years on it, in some college laboratory figuring it out, or writing a thesis paper on it. But that's never good to us as a production, and as a creative company, that we need it so that people can use it. And so that's what our software department was all about, as far as developing these tools for our animators and our technical directors to use.
And what else have we done? We've also done things like added dynamics to our system, dynamic animation of the hair. Previously, like in Jumanji days, the hair would be animated by hand by an animator, or would follow the motion of the creature. But it wouldn't respond to wind. It wouldn't respond to, a dynamic motion of the object that contained it.
The mosquitoes were a perfect candidate for computer-generated imagery, because they are flying and really don't have much contact with anything other than the tennis racket and the glass. So there's a scene where they poke a hole in a car windshield, but it made much more sense for it to be a total CGI than animatronics.
So I love working on the mosquitoes, because they're, I got to model it, but we put a lot of work into this thing of this iridescent shader on the mosquitoes. And the funny thing about that is, ultimately, the things are buzzing around so fast and they're so tiny, nobody even sees them, And it was such a disappointment, but we did it. We wanted to put that detail in there. Nobody will ever see it, but it was just sort of that bug iridescence, and so that was kind of a neat thing.
The biggest reason for doing the monkeys as CG as opposed to animatronic or puppets or something like that is because you see their full bodies and they just interact so much. They run around, they jump around. Technically, just a little bit too difficult to do. That much motion with all the servo motors and whatever would have to be mounted within the body of the monkeys. Uh-oh, here come the monkeys. And when we first open the door and see the monkeys, this is about as many monkeys as you ever see in one scene, and those few seconds would take several weeks to work out. Just the choreography of where all the monkeys were in the room, how they fly around, get their little mannerisms, how they jump up and down. And
There's some cool stuff in here, but things I remember more like the painful things, like there's this ape here that's going to throw this tomato. I can't tell you how many times we shot that.
most of the stuff that's happening in the kitchen, the swinging soup ladles and pans, the cereal boxes falling off, the things being dumped out of the refrigerator and rolling on the ground, those are all real that were rigged up by the live-action practical gang. Anything that the monkeys themselves are touching, like the cup and the soup label or the knives that the monkey throw, are all computer-generated.
Mainly what happens is after you've decided on what the basic action is with storyboards and discussions, then you work with all the set design guys, mechanical effects guys, and plan what kind of interactive action you want on your set to happen. And essentially, the more interaction you can get in the set, the better you can pull off the gag, because it puts it in there more and it makes it much more realistic.
All of the decisions of what the monkeys were going to do was decided well in advance, because the practical effects team needed to move the things around. Like if the refrigerator needs to be hit by a monkey or something a monkey throws, then the refrigerator has to be rigged to move and come out on their own. Like when he's dumping out the cup, that's actually on a rod sticking out the back end of the refrigerator that we then painted out.
His fangs are sharp. He likes your taste. Your party better move post haste.
Again, a great Joe Johnston style shot is, in one shot you see the shadow of the lion on the wall roar, and then the camera tilts down to the keys and the lion's feet step onto it, and that's all you initially see. It's a great way to build the suspense and show you the character without showing you the character. And our animatronic lion basically was designed by us, and then ILM scanned it and took samples of hair texture and so on, and of course looked at the footage that had been photographed to duplicate it.
It's an expensive puppet. That's a cool shot of the lion, though. When he walks in, this 180 pan, this is what took us forever. Plus, you're right on top of the hair work, and then you do this direct cut to that. So it was a difficult blend.
One of the big challenges, of course, on Jumanji was to make this lion, and it wasn't only a technical challenge; it was also an aesthetic challenge. And the way I look at it, it was also a matter of trying to make it look like the amalgamated lion. So there were really three things that we had to do and do very well. It was actually make this thing and solve the technical challenge, make it look good in general, and make it match their lion. So that it's not like the last two things are the same. Making it look good and making it look like the amalgamated lion are different, because they had a reason that they wanted us to do these shots, and it's because the puppet lion couldn't do certain shots. We couldn't see a puppet lion walking across the floor, for instance. So we had to make ours look like theirs, but it also had to look good doing the things that their lion couldn't do. What we generally do, and we did in this case, is we get the model of the lion's head, just the body part, not the hair. We would get some hair that they used on the lion, and we would try to match, and then from a lot of reference shots, we would try to match, the look of the lion. So we would get the model in, we'd bring it in the system, scan it in, fix it up in our modeling system, and then begin to work on trying to match the look using our hair system.
And again, that lion was part mechanical and part performer in a suit, that performer being Tom Woodruff. He was on in a sling, basically, that was supported by a boom arm, and he could operate the front arms of the lion to get walking action and paw swatting and so on. And then the face was servo controlled and had about 27 motors inside it to make its various expressions and snarls and so on, and a mechanical neck. And it took, I think, about 5 puppeteers to operate that.
Yeah, the reason we chose to put me inside the body of the lion was there's a complication to mechanizing arms that we always seem to get into. First of all, it's partly a performance thing in that there are so many complicated moves that all have to happen together that it's difficult to get a really natural performance if you want a full range of movement because of the subtlety of it. So being inside the lion and using my arms for the front paws, we were able to take the weight of the lion, put it on the boom arm that was supporting me, and just give me enough weight so that I could do a little bit of up and down body movement, which made it look very natural. It gave the lion some weight so it didn't have the feeling of a puppet that was floating across the floor. And then in addition to that, the way the suit was built was we had a muscle suit built into the lion suit, including basically plastic extensions that came up off of my shoulders and into the shoulders of the lion, which ride much higher on the lion's body, so that the movement of my shoulders would translate to the movement of the lion on the outside and give it a much more believable sort of body movement.
So we took some liberties with the design of an actual lion. We sloped the forehead backwards. We heightened the cheekbones and gave it a generally beefier, more muscular look than a real lion would have. And we built a lion. It was a full-body lion. It was intended for shots, primarily close-up shots of facial expression and paw movement and so on. And the CGI lion was intended for the gross body movements, leaping, running, jumping, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it seemed to happen pretty early on that it was decided that if there were overlapping characters, overlapping creatures, that we would sort of take the design lead and you know, through Joe, come up with the look of several of the characters that way, all the way up to the point of, for example, with the lion, we produced a scale maquette of the lion sculpture that we sent to ILM that they could then scan, and that became the basis for their version of the lion.
So here again, you have interactive stuff where they've rigged the police car to blow up. It's rigged to drive. They had a driver. Oh, that's right. They had some kind of a driving mechanism in this car for the monkeys supposedly to be doing. You know, the thing cocking and firing, that was a mechanical gag on the set, as obviously that is.
As with the kitchen scene, the things inside the car were rigged to move around, although there's not quite as much rigging required. A little bit of steering wheel and, you know, the gear shifter and the gas pedal and stuff like that. When the monkey steps on the gas and he pushes back on the seat, it didn't look right. It was originally filmed with just the seat there. I think the gas pedal moved a little bit on its own, but the seat didn't really pull back. And to make it look like the monkey was really putting all his weight into pushing that gas pedal down, we had to bend the seat back on its own. We created a digital 3D car seat and painted it and then moved it with a little arch in where the monkey's back was to push the car seat down. That really helped sell the scene. It just looked a lot better once we had that in there. More of it was just trying to get the monkeys to fit into the lighting and the environment of it, because there's light coming in through the windshield, but it's dark underneath. You have to light the thing so that it looks like there's light coming in through the windshield and reflecting off of the glass panels and stuff. The monkeys running up to the car, they get in, trying to see them through the glass was a real challenge, because the car was sitting there with no monkeys in them, but the glass reflection was there, and trying to put the monkeys behind the reflection in the glass required us to sort of recreate that reflection from scratch and then put it in on top of the monkeys in there.
I got to animate some of the shots where they're jumping into the police car and they shoot the roof off and stuff like that. So I enjoyed that because and on top of animating, you get to doing humorous aspects of the film, you know. I'm trying to, David Alan Greer's the character that they're meddling with, you know. He's such a comedian himself, and so Joe gave us the ability to, the task to, I think, add a little bit of humor. Most of the shots, they're very menacing, and they are in this shot, but there's a certain humor to them stealing the police car, so that was fun to do.
It was also kind of difficult to settle on a look for the monkeys because the director wanted them to not be any particular real monkey. They were supposed to be an imaginative, stylized Jumanji monkey. And so it would be recognized that, oh yes, these are monkeys, but they're not rhesus monkeys, they're not chimpanzees, they're not real life monkeys. So this way we could give them whatever qualities and intelligence we wanted to. It would be a little bit more fitting. But this also meant they had to look a little bit different. We started with a whole bunch of different monkey ideas and came up with sort of a combined mishmash of monkey mannerisms and monkey looks. And probably the most noticeably different one is the bright red hair that they have. This was a little controversial at times because we say, well, it doesn't look real, but then we can look at books that have monkeys with even brighter red hair than what we ended up with, and they don't look real either, but there they are. So we ended up settling on a look that's a combination of real with a little bit of fantasy and imagination. The monkeys were sort of somewhere between comic relief and like the antithesis of what's going on in the picture. They're sort of like the bouncing board of everything that can possibly go wrong to you in the movie. They're supposed to be intelligent and mischievous, and you don't know if they're necessarily trying to hurt you, but they want to be noticed, they want to be in your face, they want to be in the way. This is sort of best seen in the kitchen scene where you see the monkeys first, hanging from the chandeliers, banging on the walls, playing with the stove, throwing knives, and just completely trashing the kitchen thing. They're probably just having fun, but at the same time they're saying, hey, we're here, you're going to have to deal with us. And then we see them later on in the movie like 3 or 4 times, wrecking their own little mayhem throughout. Just from the shape of the monkey's face, you can see that they have a little bit of a mean streak in them. They have very furrowed brows and a sort of an evil, sardonic grin that they have, very mischievous and perhaps a little bit evil, but, I don't know if that's necessarily what they're supposed to be, but, they certainly do, cause a lot of problems for our heroes.
This day you can't believe how, you got to remember that it was like, 10 degrees in some of these shots. In Vancouver at the time, it was freezing.
Hey, look. Isn't that Mrs. Thomas? Who's the realtor?
Quiet. Listen. You hear that?
Hear what?
Get in the car. Okay, think. What came out of the game before me?
There was a lion, a bunch of monkeys, and
And we have our mosquitoes again, and I really don't, there's not much to say here. I mean, we laid in some effects that made you believe that some of the flares and some of the interactive lighting on the window was in front of our mosquito in shots like this. It's subtle, and you can also see its shadow as it passes out of the top of the frame. It sort of crosses where the ambient light is hitting the window. So subtle things like that, especially for us effects geeks, really, get us excited. I like that. And of course, the break in the glass is a painted thing that we did. It never really was there, of course. Actors don't like responding to nothing, and there's very few of them that do it really well. And most of them can do it pretty good, but there's only a couple of great ones out there. And Robin's obviously one of them. He keeps doing it in every movie. He's well trained now. And some actors will look past the obvious because they don't really, you got to tell them, this thing's really right here. So they're just kind of staring off, 40 feet away when it's 2 feet in front of their face, and you can spot it a mile away. It's a simple thing like that. It's where their eyes focus. The king of all time was Bob Hoskins on Roger Rabbit. Never seen anyone hit it so perfectly as he did. Actually, Kirsten was pretty good at all this sort of thing, reacting to nothing. There wasn't anything set up in the scene for her to deal with because they didn't want to paint it out, I'm sure. And you just kind of give an actor the idea that this thing is this big. You have artwork to show if you have it. Luckily, even during the show, the progress of the film while we were shooting, we were able to send up different shots that we were doing to show Robin Williams and everybody else what was going on and what the shots were turning out like, and it got everyone really fired up and excited about it.
I think actors like the fact that we're right there on the set because it makes it less technical. I think if you're playing in a blank field or even worse, just against a green wall, there's so much that's required of the actor to fill in the blanks just to get to the point of being able to deliver a performance. I think the more that we can give them on set, the more they have to play against, I think the better their performance ends up being. I always like this shot just because of the range of movement that the lion shows. It goes from this kind of a sleepy look to picking up its head. And on the set, I think we were doing a full-on roar, and ultimately it became a more of a yawning kind of bored sound, which really fits in better with the prospect of him just laying around on that bed waiting for something to happen. Later during that same setup, we had the lion suddenly stand up on its legs. So in that setup, we were able to go all the way up into a standing position. We just Joe chose not to use that aspect of it.
Yeah, there's one monkey that got left behind in the fridge from the first scene that we see them, and so when he comes out, he's a little cold and shivery. We actually stop framed him a little bit in there to make him look a little bit more jittery and cold, and we whitened his fur just a little bit in there so it looked a little bit like he had icicles on him. To make the monkey look like he was shivering, we would animate him kind of like a stop-motion animator would, in that you take a pose and then you hold that for a frame or two, and then you go to another pose and then you hold that for a frame or two, and then you go back and forth between those two poses, and that gives you a bit of a jittery type feel. Rather than the typical fluid, smooth animation that you would normally want for some character that's just walking or reacting. If you're cold, your actions are very staccato and stuttered, and we wanted to mimic that in the animation of the monkey.
With the type of thing that we do on set, there's so much room for improvisation. I think that's another one of the strong points. It's sort of what gives the work that we do more of the immediacy of acting, because something can come up either from an actor or from a director that we can respond to, and we can sort of work it into the performance. And especially when you have a team of puppeteers like we had on this particular movie that had been together on a number of projects, and you start to understand the workflow. It's really a difficult thing to explain, but there's sort of this energy that happens where each person is responsible for a particular series of movements on a puppet technically, but in conjunction with the other puppeteers' movements, it becomes expressive and it becomes performance. And a lot of it is just happening on a sort of a level of an intuitive level where you don't really discuss it a lot. You don't get into a lot of calling out the numbers. When you're with a good team of puppeteers, you understand what the needs are, and you understand how you fit into the overall picture. And it actually gets to be a lot of fun. Some of the best stuff we get comes out of improvisation, where the director or another actor will say, well, let's try this or let's do that. Sigourney Weaver used to do a lot of that on the Alien films and throw us little bits to play with. And because it was so fresh and everybody was so up and excited, it really came out as some wonderful bits of performance. We also had, on Jumanji, we also had this wonderful DP, Thomas Ackerman, who was lighting our work to this really wonderful effect of bringing out all of the subtleties of it, particularly the lion. Some of the dailies, when we first saw the dailies, it was just so exciting to see it looking as good as it did, looking as real as it did. And he's had experience. He knows how to light these kinds of things to make them look natural.
Sometimes what we'll do with DPs is talk them through all the basic design elements of the character. For instance, if we've built translucence into the skin, or if there's highlights on hair that we've put in a very specific place to achieve a specific effect, whether it be to, help disguise the fact that Tom is in the suit, or, amplify cheekbones or whatever. Reflectivity of the eyes, for instance, the lion had very beautifully made eyes where we actually used metallic paints in the eyes to get a reflective quality. And as we started talking through those aspects with Tom, we became very quickly aware that he'd already noticed it all. He was very good at looking at each character and seeing where he could backlight to get light to show through the gullet of the pelican, or rim lighting the lion's hair to amplify the texture or whatever. But he had a very good, keen, natural sense of all that, which made our job very easy.
I mean, what they're reacting to is how nicely the director of photography, Tom Ackerman, did his job. And so, I mean, the whole movie's lit well. It's not that Tom went out of his way to change anything when he had a puppet there, although he took things into consideration like how to light them so they are at their best. You know, a slightly different light or a hard light brings out details. And he did a great job. And then what we're doing is basically backing in to our models the lighting that he sets up on the set. So you lay out diagrams of all the lighting. You take notes as to where the key light is, how many lights do this, that, and everything, what kind of gels, you know, any filters on the lens, all that sort of thing. Height of camera, camera from subject, camera from this, that, and the other thing, so you can plot out each animal has to move in a 3D synthetic environment, which matches the set. So when it lands and it touches down and it's jumping and when it's standing still or whatever it's doing, you are duplicating your set basically in each shot in the computer. So you have to take a lot of measurements for that stuff, which is no fun. And basically you are creating something for them to move in. So when they're animated jumping around, they're really touching down for it, kind of the real set. And then when that's superimposed over the set that existed in Vancouver, if it's done right, it should match up pretty well. And that can affect how your shadows play on the ground and a lot of other things. And it can be a very, you know, I wish the process was easier. It's still not a very high-tech sort of process to get that information into the computer, because you're still taking, you know, measuring devices, tape measures, and you're going out there from the lens and you're giving yourself different marks to follow and then take those measurements, build it back into the computer. In a 3D space, it can then kind of interpolate that information and then figure out what everything else more or less should be.
I know lighting is typically a hard concept to get a hold of for a lot of people at least as we do it in the computer world, but it's all based on reality for us, because we are creating this three-dimensional world. It's on a flat television screen basically, but there's all the perspective you're seeing as if it's somebody shooting with a camera, because we've built that whole room and the character, and we make sure that they are in the correct dimensional space that they would be. As if she's 5 feet from the wall, we know that in our computer world she's 5 units from the wall. We're doing exactly like a DP or you know, the camera crew would do. We set up the camera where the cameraman had set it up. We've recorded where the DP put certain lights, and so we have an arsenal of lights of our own that sort of emulate exactly what's been done on the set. A lot of times they're using, you know, silks to diffuse the light, so we can say we want a much more diffuse light, or, you know, if it's a spotlight that's focusing in on a certain area, we know our lights can do the exact same thing. So we have all the tools, you know, they're virtual movie sets and movie tools, and we do it the same way.
Oh, you cheated. I wonder how they move those. Okay, the plants. What can I tell you about that? Obviously, we were basing it on the amalgamated large vine stuff that they had built, and they also had miles and miles of this rubber material that they changed the set into after this sequence took place. That's when they come back to the house after they're outside, and it's like a whole jungle of vines and trees and stuff.
This is the scene where the jungle plants overtake the house, and a great deal of the early stuff here, the vines and everything, was all done with CG, and that was as much a matter of practicality as anything else as well, in order to get all the different movement of the vines and the coverage. It was something that would be very difficult to do with traditional puppets.
And then, of course, there's the giant man-eating plant pod that erupts out of the bureau. It's trying to eat Bradley Pierce, and what that was a big mechanical understructure that had foam rubber sculpted leaves applied over top of it, and a nasty-looking shell carapace over top of that. But we wanted to create something that looked meaty enough and muscular enough to be doing what it was doing, but at the same time worked in a kind of plant-like context. The carapace on top of it was we designed after this seed pod that I found at my kids' preschool out in the parking lot. It was just such a wicked thing. We showed Joe, and he really was creeped out by it, so we incorporated that into the design. I think that the plant pod was successful. Of course, you always look at these things, and you know, our rule is to never be too satisfied, basically, because then you stop improving. I wish that we could have had a more explosive exit out of the piece of furniture, but that was a conceptual thing there, and you know, you always want to go back and redo everything. In fact, we kind of torture ourselves over those issues.
We created these vines that went along with the live-action puppet vines in CG, so they could crawl around on the floor and overtake walls and ceilings and things, and see a lot of animation in them in a way that they weren't getting from the traditional effects. And so there was a challenge there to make the vines wiggle around but have the leaves attached in a natural way. And so we created a program to do that. The other thing, and that was a big effort, because in some scenes there were very, very many vines, and every vine had leaves attached to it, and they had to go through this whole big process to make sure each vine had the right leaves and oriented the right way.
So basically it was a relatively simple 3D model to make. We never had to do the flower gag. We were just doing sort of the tentacles of the thing to get a little more, you know, specific action of it that you can't get out of a mechanical piece. So we were matching to what the guys built and shot some inserts. Basically, Joe actually he personally shot the insert of like the socket moving and the crack in the plaster and stuff. I remember sitting around that freezing stage while he was doing that.
We did do one flower that opens up and blooms, and that was basically a cable-operated mechanism under a very exotic-looking sculpted flower that we created on our own to Joe Johnston's direction.
We worked with Jim Bissell, the production designer, on making the sets accessible to puppeteers, for instance, opening up the floors so that we could get people underneath them. And it was like the giant man-eating plant where the floor had to be removable and we had to have puppeteers down low and so on. And he would make the modifications to the set that we needed.
My name is Ellen Poon, and I worked on Jumanji as a computer graphics supervisor. On Jumanji, the part that I was responsible for was the stampede sequence. Well, the stampede sequence was hard work. It's really, really difficult work, and not just because, you know, we're animating these incredibly agile animals who, as I said, very, you know, they have to be absolutely realistic, but also there were a lot of them. The stampede sequence was sort of, for us, the first time we had to do multiple creatures and over 100 of them in one shot, in one scene, and not feel like we're taking the whole facility down as far as computing power. And they basically run through the house first, after they come out of the board, and then they run out into the town to go and look for food or something, you know. And then that's involves sort of herd animation, you know, making sure they're running the right way and they're not bump into each other, and then they're sort of choreographed in an interesting fashion. And then the next level, after we got that out of the way, then the next level is to animate some individual ones that have very, you know, they have kind of personalities.
Nothing was built for the Stampede. So everything for that was built except for the, I guess, the Pelican. Van Pelt is shooting at the police car. A lot of the hits didn't work very well, so actually a lot of the hits in the car are artificial. They're put in by us. You know, I don't remember why we got stuck putting them in the shot, but I don't think Joe thought they were quite big enough. So made them a little bigger because that gun's so big. You think all we do are creatures. You inherit some stuff. Now we're leading up to the Stampede, which is probably the coolest stuff in the movie.
Our job was to put these guys in there and then have them literally destroying this house and kicking up dust, debris, knocking into walls, you know, and having all this plaster flying all over the place. So first thing first, obviously, is to animate those guys and have them looking really menacing. And so we sort of have some tricks to make sure that they look like they come really close to the camera. And if you have seen the original play, you would have noticed that the house was pristine when they shot it. It was, they tried to do some practical effects by pulling chairs, pulling some paintings down. And then the biggest practical effect they did was to sort of have a blue rhino, like a metal rhino, going through the library. But that was as far as it goes.
And what we did for the bookcase exploding was, first of all, Stan Parks did all the mechanical work on the show. And he had the whole set rigged up with these bizarre vibrating whatnots. So every wall was shaking and shivering. It was like being in an earthquake, which is kind of neat. And then on the other side of the wall where the rhinos come in, they had two big, large, bulky, painted, I think they were metal shapes like rhinos, very simplistic shapes, painted blue, blue screen blue. That really didn't help us here, but we did it anyway. And at the right moment when the shot was happening, we shot the scene where Robin grabs the game. Of course, it's not all happening at once. You can't take that chance. So the first thing we shot was Robin runs in, grabs the game after he forgot it, and runs out of the shot. And we do a bunch of takes of that. So he leaves. Everyone clears the set. We roll, have several different cameras on it. And then they just blasted this device through the wall, and then it just came to a stop, and that was it. And all the debris was flying through the air. But a lot of rigging for the set here, a lot of bits and pieces tied to, a lot of different devices behind the walls to knock stuff off. Then you take that, and then you take it back to the ILM, and you start backing your animation of the rhinos into that and where their positions are. And it was a horrific job for the rotoscope artists, which are people that actually have to hand draw and animate mats around objects and scenes that you're putting your effect behind. And then the rhinos are animated behind that.
And then the other thing was to paint in a lot of the damages onto the live action background plates. And that wasn't even enough, of course, because you just wanted the whole thing to be really chaotic. So we shot a lot of live action elements, debris, dust, all kinds of things, and just throw them in. There's one of the scenes I remember, I think there were actually literally 36 debris elements thrown in there to make it look like these guys were interacting with them. And and really have a sense that this house was about to collapse.
And there's a lot of mechanical shaking stuff going on in the shots, and the scenes without visual effects. We shot most of the effects work with VistaVision, which gives you a lot of extra negative to play with. We would take that and then put an artificial shake on that because we had room to move around that matched the live action shake. So everything has this kind of tremble to it to add to kind of the intensity of the moment. And I thought this was one of the more fun ideas in the film and worked pretty well.
Well, after the stampede finishes, the initial stampede, the last kind of straggler is a pelican who picks up the game board and flies away. And Joe wanted this pelican to be a little bit mischievous and kind of surly. So we designed it accordingly, gave it a little bit more of an anthropomorphic feel in the eyes. We made the eyes more forward-facing as opposed to side-facing outward as a real pelican has. Gave it a little bit of a brow ridge that made it look a little more intense. And we amplified some of the other, like the shape of the bill, for instance, is a little more aggressive looking than a real pelican's. There's a kind of a meaner hook on the end of it, and so on.
I think Jimmy Mitchell animated this, and he did a great job, the pelican. And see, now here's a much better match to puppet and CG creature. This match is very close because of when things were finished by Amalgamated, and we got a hold of it. I think Peter Dalton animated that.
Robin reaches into the river and scoops up a fish and tosses it to the pelican, who catches it. And we actually were able to catch the fish with the cable-operated pelican a few times. And then I think we also did over-the-shoulder shots where Tom was puppeteering the hand-puppeted version and catching the little mechanical fish as well. The mechanical fish was built by Stan Parks and his crew. And what we built was a couple of versions of it. We had a hand-puppeted version of the pelican that Tom reached his arm up through to hand puppet it, and we had a separate lever control that would open and close the mouth, and that's basically all that puppet did. It also had wings that were rod operated. We used a full body version of it that was all cable operated with a servo animatronic face that had eye blink and brow movement. The eyes also were kind of pinkish red, sort of an albino look, just to make it look a little more menacing and strange. There was also a close-up foot of the pelican that we made for a shot where it steps on the game board as if sort of protectively, and then kicks the game board out from under it. And the foot was made out of a silicone material to give that floppy, translucent look.
The pelican character, he has a tuft of hair on the top of his head, and then he has a different kind of hair around his face and a different kind on his neck, and all those things were done using parameters, numeric parameters, and painted maps. And we developed, for him, we developed a technique which we refer to as tufting, to get the hairs to stick together in a particular way, to, so that you get this impression of a particular kind of feather on his head. And we've used that a lot since then to give the impression of hair that sticks together due to whatever you stick in it, whatever you put in it, or water, or just a natural tendency of hair to stick together, static electricity or whatever.
At the very, very end of the schedule, I was working on the monkey looting sequence at the end of the schedule, where they're watching the flying monkeys from Wizard of Oz on there, and they sort of see them and get excited about that, and then say, hey, we can just go and do some more mayhem here. The very last shot that I worked on was the wide shot of the monkeys completely trashing the store, throwing TVs and boxes and stuff inside there. A lot of the boxes were actually thrown by guys behind the counters like that, and other boxes were computer generated, and like the things that the monkeys are carrying out are computer generated. And we also had to erase, like a hand of a stage guy here and a foot there, and remove a little bit of the stuff that was used to explode the window when it came crashing through, and there's all kinds of stuff. That was like a week solid of just my time plodding through, figuring out what you could see, what you weren't supposed to see, and fixing it. And that was on top of getting all the monkeys and the boxes and the TVs and stuff to look right inside the store.
Yeah, more monkeys. It also looks like in this scene, if I remember right, that we were probably doing more work on the hair so it looks better. This is later in the movie schedule. It's great that one's stealing a computer monitor. I thought David Alan Grier was terrific in this. He was actually the most fun to me. He had the best takes, especially when the vine comes in through his cop car window. What's great about working on a movie with Robin is you get all the greatest free stand-up every day you could imagine. I mean, the set is a riot. And Bonnie Hunt, too, the two of them together, man, you can't stop laughing. It's dangerous because you can wear the crew out before you even roll. And he's terrific. Robin really has it down because, I mean, obviously he's got such a great imagination, but it's not just, he has the most facile mind you've ever seen. And the last thing I did was Patch Adams with him, and either he can be knocking you with his jokes and his shtick, but if you get on a serious conversation, he somehow seems to know everything.
I'm sorry.
But when we started working with Robin, we were very surprised at how quiet he was. When he was just with us and we were talking about what the action was going to be, what the puppets were capable of doing, he was very introverted and almost shy and just completely respectful of everything. Really enjoyed watching all the puppeteers work together. And then when you got him in the scene with the puppet, he would just completely cut loose, and I'm sure there were takes ruined because the crew was cracking up at some of his ad libs, but he was really a lot of fun to work with.
Here's some of the coolest shots in the film when the stampede comes through the town. And again, what we have are not just the animals, but we have leaves and dust elements layered in on top of what they're doing. All these people here are rotoscoped in front of the animals. They're all CG animals built in a computer, animated by artists. The door of the car flying off is a false door that we built. There's the icon shot of the movie. Now the car here, of course, Stan Parks rigged to get crushed without anything crushing it at the location. So all of the damage to it is really happening. There's just nothing there. So that is all back choreographed into what the action is, as discussed by the animators and everybody else. Now the slow rhino, Wheezy, they even gave it a name, was an accident. When we were animating that shot in the Stampede, the last shot, somebody had done the wrong math and put in too many frames on the rhino. When I was looking at the monitor, when I saw it, I laughed. I just went, that's funny. So I called up Joe and I said, you cannot lose this. Keep this in the movie. It's a funny gag. Give some character to these rhinos. And he saw it and he loved it too, so luckily they just kept it in. Then they added, of course, sound effects to it. And it's like we planned it. So
we just put it in and actually put some, panting animation in there and a little bit of kind of that sort of breath coming out of him to see if they would buy it. And they said, yeah, I loved it. It's, Joe Johnston was like, yeah, well, and we call him Pokey. One of the most interesting scenes for me is that elephant going over the car, stepping on the car and then crushing it. And that was really hard because, elephant is a big animal. Shifting weight is not an easy thing. And we had to work with the practical element that was shot on the set, right? With the car being crushed in various different, over time and in very different ways. So working with that was fun. It was really good. And then we have some sort of rhinoceros sort of running slower than everyone else and panting because it's just trying to catch its breath. All of that stuff was just making it harder, but then making it sort of more creative for us.
It sounds like something out of the Twilight Zone, but it's true, all right?
Sometimes, depending on the action, you can do very simplistic CG models for the basic timing and direction of the scene. Like some of the Stampede stuff, the first stuff running through is very insane, simplistic forms, basically. And you can use that as a kind of a timing thing to try and get that to work. As far as specific actions and how that cuts from scene to scene, well, that's all so pre-planned. You generally nail it pretty close. About, a head's turning this way, and then you realize you're going to have to finish that in the next cut, and you just talk about it a lot with the editor. And basically, it's not easy. Whatever you do, it's not easy. You can try to create as much early work as possible to start forming the sequence, but really it's down to waiting for the real shot to get close enough so you know what to do with it. Actually, I also remember there was some very interesting R&D work on Alan Parrish getting sucked into the game at the beginning of the film, on looks of what that might be on his face, and very bizarre stuff that's not in the movie.
For the monkeys riding on the motorcycle, it was largely the same thing. Like the little comic thing of putting the helmet on the one monkey backwards. I forget whose idea it was. It was somebody here. For the monkeys riding on the motorcycle, the biggest technical challenge there was the fur blowing in the wind, because we obviously wanted to make it look like they were traveling at a decent velocity outside. So we rigged some little math functions to make the hairs wiggle in the direction of the wind blowing.
More monkeys on a motorcycle, so Stan Parks had to rig a motorcycle to run without a driver. And it seems like we might have had to paint something out in that shot, and I don't recall that. Maybe there was something to help balance it that we had to remove, possibly. Kirsten was also in Interview with a Vampire, so she was familiar with visual effects films. She's great. She's unbelievable. Future great actress.
We also did some character makeups on Bradley Pierce, who plays the little boy in the film. He cheats in the game and ends up starting to de-evolve and turn into a monkey. So we did a few different stages of that transformation, some of which went on Bradley Pierce and some of which went on two little boys that were stunt people. They were twins. And they involved hair pieces and rubber facial pieces, sort of like the original Planet of the Apes pieces that allowed him to have expression and showed his eyes and so on.
Turn the siren off right there, right there.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Stop your cringing, woman. I could have shot you at any moment.
Then why didn't you?
You didn't roll the dice. Alan did. There it is, there it is, there it is. Hit the brakes. Hit the brakes! Hit the brakes! Hit the brakes! No, hit the brakes! Hit the brakes! Ah! He should be here any moment.
Initially, he thought of doing like a baboon sort of face, but it extended the muzzle so much that it looked more dog-like and became a bigger problem for articulation. Bradley Pierce seemed to enjoy wearing the makeups, but it is a difficult thing to put anybody through, let alone a young kid. So I think he was relieved whenever the stunt people were in to wear the makeup for him for a day. I think he may have worn it for about, I don't know, somewhere 15, 20 days.
Where at least 98 people have been hospitalized with symptoms ranging from inexplicable fevers and rashes to violent seizures. Local resources have been strained to the breaking point, and state health officials are now asking anyone experiencing such symptoms to dial 911.
Again, here, Wheezy shows up again, the slow rhino at the end of this scene with Bebe Neuwirth in the car. And it also gives an opportunity for one of the monkeys to sneak in the back of the vehicle when she's not paying attention to it. But again, you have things like flares from the sun that we're trying to duplicate that go in front of the animals that the camera has going on the lens, just so it looks more real. And this stuff was tough to blend in because of the strange winter lighting. A lot of it was kind of flat and gray and lifeless, so you're trying to blend animals into that. It's a hard environment to blend in. If it was more contrasty, more striking with color and different form to the light, that can be a little easier.
Scene where the monkey gets into the back of the lady's car. I forget what her name is. Anyway, just gets into just crawls into the back of her car while she's out looking at the stampede going by, and you see the monkey, from about the nose up in the back seat, just sort of looking around, and then you don't have to see what happens next. The wide action scream shot sort of just tells you all that you need to know. I think it's actually funnier that way than it would be if you had actually seen what happened.
The whole effect, the whole technique of appliance makeups goes back even into the 30s. Certainly The Wizard of Oz was one of the early big movies that made extensive use of appliances, and that was 1939. And there were appliance makeups that had been done prior to that, and the techniques have not changed substantially since that time. We've certainly gotten into more materials, more extensive uses of silicones and plastics and more translucent materials, but the technique is still pretty much the same.
It was great that Jim Bissell did this great destroyed, stampeded set. I mean, it's so cool. They had miles and miles of this rubber material that they changed the set into after this sequence took place. That's when they come back to the house after they're outside, and it's like a whole jungle of vines and trees and stuff. That was very cool. I mean, this was a really interesting production designer's challenge, this film. Now, the scene that's coming up where this vine pulls the car in, they tried to do this mechanically. It just did not work. And so we inherited this shot where basically we have a mechanical car getting tipped up, but everything after that is artificial. So we actually blend from the real car to a completely computer graphic car.
The other thing that we did was to create this, well, it was also a vine kind of effect, but it was to crush a car and drag it into the forest. And that one, I was particularly proud of that one because it involved a live action plate which had a car being pulled up on its side. And then what we did was we took that and turned it into a CG car so that there's a transition from a real car in the scene to a CG car in the scene, and then it's all CG and CG vines, CG car and vines, and it drags it into the forest. And the thing that I really like about that was that we did it in one frame. We did a jump cut from the real car to the CG car, and you really can't tell at all. And so I was really happy with that. And it would have been very difficult to match it. We even tried to match it over a number of frames, but it turned out that it was actually easier to do it in a single frame. It was actually easier to do a jump cut than to do like a transition, a fade or a dissolve or something from one to the other. But still very, very cool.
I think it's this next, not this cut, the next cut possibly. This moment, this is real, then suddenly in here when it starts to crunk, this is all CG. We took the plate, all these trees getting knocked up in front of the car, those are all blue screen trees I shot at ILM. And the background is just stuff that we moved at the location. And even the side trees that are real that do this, it's all taking a tree that's not moving at all and animating it in the computer later. So everything's being affected by this car getting pulled in, when at the time, nothing was being affected by it. It was a complicated shot, and dust going up, we shot on the stage. All the separate elements had to be shot and then built on top of each other in that scene. It was tough. This is, of course, mostly mechanical and special effects. We did a couple of shots of the clouds forming at the beginning, which was some kind of dry ice mixture and something shot down on the floor, and then we made it look like it was on the ceiling.
Originally, the crocodile were to be 24 feet long, and when we looked at the floor plan for the design of the foyer, we all sort of realized at the same time that there was no way we could fit two 24-foot crocodile in that area and have them be able to swim around the dining room table, which was floating in the center. So we had to scale back, and we ended up coming up with, I think, about a 12-foot-long crocodile. But we didn't want to lose the impact of this large head, so we actually cheated the proportion of the crocodile in such a way that it has a much larger head and front section, and it sort of diminishes as it goes back towards the tail, almost like a forced perspective sort of crocodile. But it was very effective in the way it was shot when it's swimming towards the camera or lunging at the camera, because it's just all mouth and head, and it's very articulate. It was all there were two different versions that we did. One was a hydraulic puppet that Robin Williams was capable of riding on, and that was fully mechanized, even down to eye blinks. And we came up with this mechanism that, just to give it some extra life, when the crocodile's eyes would blink, the eyes themselves are on these retractable sliders, and the eye would sort of pull back into the head as the lid blinked around it.
Well, this is actually a crocodile that we built, a couple of them that we built for Jumanji. And it was designed, once again, in keeping with the look of the Jumanji animals, to look more ferocious and have more personality and attitude than a real crocodile would have. And we looked at the crocodile from Peter Pan, and we really liked the basic feel of that. As cartoony and stylized as that was, we thought there was something there that we could use. Basically, it was a large, fat, squat crocodile that had big, fat jowls and a little pointy nose. So taking that sort of spirit, we redesigned a real crocodile into this super ferocious Jumanji-style crocodile. We also had a little timing mishap when we were operating the hydraulic crocodile. We were responsible for all of the body movement, up and down, jaw movement, open and close, and facial functions. And Stan Parks and his crew were responsible for the forward and backward movement on a track that they had built. And we had the crocodile underwater approaching the floating table, and it was supposed to pop up out of the water and flop down on the table, which was on a pivot, sort of like a teeter-totter, and tip the far end of the table up. There was a camera mounted on the far end of the table to get that view of it. And unfortunately, the pull on the crocodile was a little bit too fast, and we were a little late with our cue. And we raised the nose of the croc, which tipped the table the opposite way and dunked the $300,000 Panavision camera into the water. Thank God no human being was hurt, because, you know, cameras you can fix.
People are really important to us.
So this, when you cut around to the back, it's two stunt people and a set built at a whole other location, which was a big empty pool of some sort, this thing. We shot the stunt people first with cables pulling them out, and then we just stood back. We had a bunch of different cameras, and there's this huge setup with a lot of water that came smashing through that door, and we blended it all together for a couple of shots. It was basically several train car loads of water on a hill, built up alongside of a hill that went up and above the set piece, so it had all this pressure of the water. Stan did a brilliant thing where he had a glass sheet 2 inches thick that held it all back, and blew the glass out, and then it immediately disappeared in the water, and that's what came through the door. It was very cool. These shots were hard, where we see the actors going down the streets. That was, again, a sort of a last-minute thing we had to do. We shot them in this weird tank at the university, I think it was, and then we shot a lot of water effects at the pool, same pool that we did the door blasting open at, moving down with cars set in the pool, and then we blended that in to neighborhood background plates that we had shot and matched it all together as best we could. It was murder. This quicksand scene was all going to be done practically. None of it's practical. Just did not work.
The way we did that was we actually just got into this technique where you're mapping the actual plate or the film image onto this flat patch, you know, that's laying out in the same perspective as the floor. And then what we do is we put these ripples in there that start undulating it. So it's a real fake, and then all you're doing is you've stuck that flat that floor texture on there, but as soon as you start rippling it, it gives it a watery feel to it, you know. And it's a great illusion, you know. It's as simple as the easiest geometry you can build, but the minute you start putting these little undulations in there, and then so that worked out real well. And it was just the idea that his movement was causing these ripples, and then the tricky part where we layered and made it much more detailed than I think was expected is that, like, when he puts his hand in there, you know, it interacts with that and all the little subtle interactions of the door setting down onto the quicksand, also causing a ripple that, you know, interferes with the other ripples and things like that. So it was pretty effective for as simple a technique as it was. Not that it didn't take us a long time.
So we're all standing around the set and everyone looks at me. What are you going to do? What do we do? Okay, pull the big phony floor out of there. Robin, this is the deal. And suddenly you come up with an invention and you hope you can make it work later because you don't really know at the time. I mean, you have a vague idea of the techniques you can use, but essentially all this stuff in here, there's nothing there but a big black velvet area around them because I didn't have blue screen material with me. Robin's just standing in black, and he's on this simple, like a scissor lift, lowering him down in this hole. And we're adding all that weird sort of soupy floor material around him. That's a great shot with a close-up of Robin's face coming out of it. Now you're back to the practical set with a hole cut in it for now that it's solidified.
Need a hand.
You know, you have a lot of limitations you're always facing when you do this stuff. Not, you know, you can come up with the best approach you want, and then the variables, all the variables that happen on a film affect everybody, and so a lot of them affect you. And the order that you want to do things, the availability of the people, the areas, the types of things, you know, the mechanical devices you need, all that stuff. If you can't get it, you got to be fast on your feet and then rethink stuff. And then the next gag is all, except for a couple of shots, is all amalgamated, the spider gag.
Mechanical spiders.
What do we have, 13? Total?
Yes, we made 13 mechanical spiders.
So for the spiders, we ended up building a total of 13 mechanical spiders, full size, 10 of which were basically built just to walk, and we came up with this sort of sophisticated cam mechanism so that by operating them through radio control, the spider was able to walk, and it gave you the impression that all legs were moving independently even though they were ganged up to move in pairs. But the spider was capable of carrying its own weight along with the weight of a battery pack and radio control receivers, so we actually could operate them all by radio control. And then we took three spiders and we built them with more sophisticated mechanisms in that they had moving fangs, and they also had the front legs were also able to move via radio control. They were completely articulated, and we could get them kind of reaching up and feeling things before they climbed through, or just menacing Robin Williams when he was locked into the floor. We also built about 10 spiders that were just stunt spiders. They weren't mechanized, and they were built to be positioned and set up so that the kids could hit them with shovels and kick them out of the way.
Sorry, I can't talk right now. I'll explain later.
The poisonous flower appears again in the attic scene and shoots a little blow darts into Kirsten Dunst's neck, and that was our mechanical flower again that was outfitted with air tubes that could fire lightweight balsa wood spines, and the makeup artist just glued a couple of the spines to her neck. We had a stunt version of the plant that the Bradley Pierce chopped in half, and then it wiggled around in its death throes with rods from under the floor to articulate it, and it squirted milky blood. One of the other techniques that we used to make the spiders scurry around quickly was that we shot them on a green stage, and ILM composited them into a background plate of the attic floor. The attic floor is very rough and had spaces in between the boards, so it was sometimes difficult to get the spiders to turn or what have you. So we did a little bit of that green screen work as well.
Now we're getting to the earthquake. This is one of my favorite shots, is this exterior of the house right here. And the whole center part of the house is a miniature that's coming apart. And so is the whole foreground. The gate, the thing falling, the lawn, the whole thing is all miniature. But to not have the whole thing be a miniature, I had the sides of the house taken from a plate that was shot. So those are still real, and those are, a split was just run down the center, and then that was animated to the timing on the miniature pulling itself apart. I think we shot at 120 frames a second. And the model itself was 5.5 feet tall, 6 feet tall.
The end sequence was actually interesting because the concept wasn't quite locked down at the get-go. We just knew these animals got to go back into the board in some interesting way. There was a specification. And then after that, it's up to us to sort of define what that's going to look like. We have these animals to work with. We also have that concept of the vortex to work with. So I sat down with Ken Roston and some of the animators and said, well, and then also art directors, and said, well, what would make it look interesting, and also like have the animals reacting to these to the force of this strong wind that turns into a kind of tornado vortex type animation. One of the things that came up was, I thought these animals would be really neat for them to actually change shape, because when they get sucked in, they would stretch, because of, they're really not real animals. They're from a different world, so they might as well kind of distort based on the shape of this vortex. Otherwise, it would never fit in there anyway to start with. Secondly, they are being dragged in by this wind, so they really don't really want to leave, but so they're kind of resisting it. So one of the things is to have them kind of go backwards. So they're like being, the tail goes first before their heads,
And now with this whole whirlpool effect at the end, we have Van Pelt, who gets sucked away. He's holding nothing when the gun starts to vaporize, after the bullet vaporizes in front of Bonnie's face. So he's holding nothing. The gun was built into the computer and then torn away with all these different effects. Now Van Pelt also is torn away. One of my favorite shots here when they come through the wall. So they blow the wall out physically. Some of it we're adding in. In this shot, the actors didn't know exactly what was going to happen, so all he's doing is standing there just kind of twisting in the wind. So in this shot, we had to roto him out of the background and actually animate him going out of the shot like he got pulled up, because he never did that on the set. So here we have all the animals distorting and doing all this weird nonsense inside this effect. Wind machines on Robin and Bonnie, I believe. And we had a lot of different elements, dust and nonsense going on. They had wind machines on the trees outside, and in we go. Did that weird thing where he gets sucked into the game at the very end, because Joe felt it was really necessary to have a real literal image of him getting pulled in at that moment, so you knew the bad guy was gone. And everything's back to normal. Oh, yay! Now, Kid, I love this, because all the time we were on the movie, we never questioned this. And actually, it's important for me on the sequel, but some young kid wrote one of the producers and said, there's a mistake in Jumanji. What's that? The gun that Van Pelt has and the bullet aren't from Jumanji, and yet they also get sucked into Jumanji. They should have killed both of them. And Van Pelt would have got sucked in, but the gun would have been left behind like everything's supposed to be. Oh yeah, the logic of Jumanji. Very interesting. It was a strange experience from all the things going on the outside of the movie, and very complicated, but I thought it turned out pretty cool, and it's a different type of a movie, which is great, and it had a lot of neat twists and turns in it, which I thought was cool, and kept you, especially with the different stories, the different timelines that are going on, and how Robin sort of connects both, the eras together, which I thought was very interesting setup for the movie. And technically, still, I mean, it's really funny now that only 5 years passed and you look back and it's not the state of the art in your mind as it used to be, because at that time it couldn't have been better done than what that was. And you look back with just how things have advanced in this short amount of time, and you see that, yeah, you could have done a lot of things better.
Yeah, now that I look back on the work that we've done on Jumanji, we certainly have come a long way. We can do Stampede really well now. We can do not just hundreds of characters, we can do thousands of characters in one scene, and not have to use up every single computer in the company. And also we have, we've had a lot of experience since then on doing creature animation. We've done a lot of studies on animals, all kinds of animals, birds and humans and all that sort of thing. We getting a lot better when it comes to doing realistic creature stuff. And it's fun, I have to say. Jumanji was very difficult, but then we learned a lot about what it entails to do that kind of work.
There's an effect shot there, the throwing the game into the river. There was no river there, and or a moon or any of that stuff, so that was all painted in. And the river was, what river did I shoot? I don't even know what it is up in Marin County. Day for night with the sun backlighting it, so it looked like the moon backlighting it, and then we stuck the moon in there, put that in so it looked like the same thing. You do that all the time.
I would, for most of Jumanji, I would put it as sort of a continuation of the work that had been done up until that point. Certainly Jurassic Park was a major breakthrough. There was some work before that sort of laid the groundwork for, like starting with The Abyss, and then Terminator 2 was another big turning point. With Jumanji, I think you have the first instance where hair and fur were really done well in a major motion picture. I think the monkeys, and especially the lion, the CG lion, were just they look really good, and it was a lot of work to get it to look that way. But I think it sort of paved the way for just the next level of what you could do with computer graphics for film. There are probably a few things that we might have done differently on Jumanji if we had the time to do them. As with any production, you always want to do more than you have time to do, and it becomes a trade-off of making it look as good as you can, given the amount of time and resources that you have available to you. Computers are faster now. The technology and the software that we have to do these kind of images have been improving at a really great speed. And if we were to go back and do it now, it would probably be a lot easier and a lot faster to do. But the next project that we do is going to have its own set of problems and its own set of new challenges that we'll have to solve. And in a way, that's what keeps this whole business interesting, is because you keep moving forward. You don't look back really, except to say, wow, that was a fun show to work on, or man, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, I came to ILM almost a little less than 9 years ago, and I think that big transitioning was starting from the way effects were done in the Star Wars era and stuff like that into the computer realm. And I'm one of, I don't know it sounds silly, the new breed of effects supervisors who come basically from the CG world, as opposed to these guys who had been, the Ralstons and the Dennis Murins and Scott Farrars and those talents. It doesn't really matter. I think as a supervisor, you're there because you have an eye. No, and it doesn't matter what your tools are. We've got another tool in the computer, a very strong tool. It's replaced a lot of what used to be optical printing and model building, certainly creature effects work. But they're all still there. as much as you think it's changed, it hasn't changed. You know, you're still building models. They did it on Star Wars. You know, these big elaborate city models. You still build the creatures because there's something about interacting with the characters. You know, so it's a combination that seems to be working. It's a powerful combination, and what it does is it says nothing can't be done. You know, it's a director should just go wild. You know, of course if he's time and money, as they say, but nothing can't be done.
So really films like this, and it's still happening, is, I mean, we're doing Stuart Little right now. So what happens is they would never even thought of doing it 5 years ago, just because of how the state of the art has advanced so far, with hair work especially these days. And it really did. It opened a lot of doors towards freeing up storytellers and directors to maybe go down roads they would have hesitated before. Not that the movie was going to be bad, but just pulling it off would be impossible. So there's a lot fewer limitations now.
Steve was the original visual effects supervisor on there, and really was why the show came to ILM. He had a good rapport with Joe, and I went back with Steve a long way, in that we both worked on Jurassic Park together, and I know his history was he had come having worked on like Harry's and those sort of machines, and he just showed himself as an animator on Jurassic Park and blew everybody away with his talent. You know, it wasn't about what tools he was using. He was just somebody who, no matter what it was, he was going to do a beautiful job, you know, whether it was in the 2D or the 3D world. And he did that on Jurassic by animating a lot of the T-Rex shots, and just shows his talent, whatever it's going to be. Painting, I know he used to do oil painting and stuff like that. So he was just an artist. And so this was his step of moving up, and it was an opportunity, and unfortunately and sadly enough, he wasn't there for the end, but he was there at the beginning, and you know, his mark's on the movie for it. You know, we all miss him for that. It was a sad thing.
I mean, Steve basically was involved in the whole look of the film, the design of the shots. He really had built all the animals, I think. By the time I came on, most of the CG creatures had, if they weren't done, they were so close that I don't really remember. I wasn't involved in any of the decisions on that, so we're pretty much done. Well, this is Ken Ralston. I hope you enjoyed the DVD and all this secret information. Thank you.